Pressure is mounting on the Home Secretary over worsening conditions at a migrant processing centre in Kent. Conditions at the facility have been described as unacceptable. It is currently housing 4 times as many migrants as it's meant for.
A facility designed to take comfortably 1,500 people and to move them on within 24 hours has turned into a refugee camp housing 4,000 people, and it's simply not fit for that purpose.
The Home Office says record numbers of people arriving on small boats have put huge pressure on the asylum system. Well, the Home Secretary will address Parliament on the issue this afternoon. Also on the programme, King Charles sends his condolences to the families of those killed in the Halloween crush in Seoul. A political comeback in Brazil for the left-wing former president, who's won back power by a narrow margin. And winding its way through the Swiss Alps, the longest passenger train in the world, 100 carriages and stretching more than a mile.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Ireland are beaten by Australia at the T20 World Cup, effectively ending their hopes of qualification, with problems for England too.
Hello, good afternoon. The Home Secretary will make a statement in the Commons this afternoon over worsening conditions at a migrant processing centre in Kent. The facility at Manston is said to be dangerously overcrowded, with reports of an outbreak of diphtheria. Some 4,000 migrants are currently being housed there, even though it's meant for only up to 1,600. Well, more people were sent to Manston over the weekend after a petrol bomb attack on a separate migrant facility in Dover. Robin Brandt has this report.
We need your help.
This video was taken yesterday. Young voices shouting from inside Manston Processing Centre. Children being shooed away are among the 4,000 or so who are crammed in at a facility designed to hold just 1,600 people. Migrants who've crossed the channel are supposed to stay here for just hours. There's evidence one family has been here for a month. The local MP has seen it for himself.
A facility designed to take comfortably 1,500 people and to move them on within 24 hours has turned into a refugee camp housing 4,000 people, and it's simply not fit for that purpose.
Most of these migrants are usually processed and then sent to hotels, but not recently. The MP thinks that was a deliberate decision.
What I am saying, on pretty good authority, from the information that I have been given, is that a policy decision was taken at the top in the Home Office to not commission more hotel space.
It's not clear if it was this Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who may have done that, or an earlier one, which for a time was also her.
Are you the right person to get this crisis under control, Home Secretary?
Or another one, way back, a few months ago. Either way, the pressure is on to explain.
There's been a huge increase in the backlog because the Home Office isn't taking decisions. They're only taking 14,000 decisions a year. They used to be taking twice as many asylum decisions as that. As a result, you've got a big increase in the backlog, and that's caused problems. And of course, we need much stronger action to prevent these dangerous boat crossings in the first place.
In nearby Dover, police are investigating a firebomb attack on an immigration detention centre. It's not clear what's behind it, but it highlights further the strain caused by a record number of migrant crossings.
Wait, and go.
People, among them young children, keep coming on small, flimsy boats.
Breathing,
walking. Some of almost 40,000 who've come so far this year are plucked from the water. Whether the problem is pull factors on this side or failings in France on the other side, every case represents a failure for a government that wants to control immigration and limit refugee numbers. Robin Brandt, BBC News.
Well, in a moment we'll talk to our political correspondent Nick Eardley, who's at Westminster. First, let's go to our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford in Kent. And Daniel, growing concerns then about conditions at Manston.
There are. I mean, those concerns were really first highlighted in the full glare of publicity by the Chief Inspector of Immigration last week, who described the situation as dangerous and a situation that left him speechless. And he said that he wasn't usually left speechless. The concern is that a centre that was built for around 1,600 people as a 24-hour processing facility has turned into a sort of long-term holding facility for some people. The inspector found somebody who'd been there for 32 days. She was a mother with children. They were sleeping on mats and in a marquee. And effectively, they'd been camping for a month on an airfield, a disused airfield 20 miles from Dover. And the problem is that there's not accommodation for people to go on to. Normally people would go on to hotels or immigration detention centres, but because the hotels weren't booked, there was nowhere for these people to go.
Daniel, thank you very much. Daniel Sanford there for us in Dover. And let's talk to our political correspondent, Nick Eardley, who's at Westminster. Nick, the Home Secretary expected to make a statement on this in the Commons this afternoon.
There's a lot of pressure building on this, Ben, because sources familiar with the process have told the BBC that Ms Braverman was warned as Home Secretary that the government was breaching its statutory duties with what was going on in Manston, and that she didn't act immediately to book those extra hotel rooms that Daniel was still talking about. Sources we've spoken to have suggested this is extraordinary, that other Home Secretaries, even when they were reluctant to do so, did book the hotels because they realised it was a legal requirement, but that in her first stint as Home Secretary, Ms Braverman didn't. Now, the word from the government is that it's wrong to say that Ms Braverman deliberately ignored advice. They are saying that she did take urgent action, but I just think this is going to pile even more pressure on the Home Secretary about why more urgent action wasn't taken to avoid the scenes we've just heard about.
And Nick, separately, we've also had more detail this morning in that row over the Home Secretary breaching security by using her personal email earlier on this month.
Another one that isn't going away, Ben. So you remember that Ms Braverman was forced to resign by Liz Truss for sending some government business via personal email address to a parliamentary colleague. I think we can show you the long letter that Ms Braverman has sent to MPs this morning, setting out her version of events, where she insists that that written ministerial statement that was sent to a parliamentary colleague didn't include sensitive information, that it wasn't something that was a huge issue, that she brought it up with the relevant authorities when the mistake was made. However, she also admits in that letter that 6 times as Home Secretary she did use she sent emails from her work email, so her Home Office email, to her personal one. And again, when she appears before MPs this afternoon, I think MPs will be wanting more clarity on exactly why this has been allowed to happen, whether it compromised security. Labour say that it just adds more questions.
Nick, thank you. Nick Eardley there, our political correspondent. King Charles has sent a message of condolence to South Korea after the crush there on Saturday that killed 154 people during Halloween celebrations. Many of the victims were teenagers and adults in their 20s. They died when a crowd surged in a packed alleyway in the capital, Seoul. King Charles said he was shocked and saddened by what he called a heartbreaking disaster. Our correspondent Jean McKenzie has the latest from Seoul.
The grief travels far beyond those who've lost someone. The whole country is mourning as it struggles to comprehend how so many young people could be crushed to death as they partied for Halloween. This narrow alley became so packed people couldn't breathe. They began to fall to the floor. Tae's friend Rahu called him as the crush started. The woman next to him was unwell, he said, and he wanted to get her out. Her hand went cold, and Rahu hung up. It was the last time Tae heard from him. He was 21. He loved hip-hop music and fashion. He worked in construction, but dreamed of being a fashion designer. This public altar gives people who aren't necessarily friends or family with those who've died a space where they can come and mourn. And it's particularly resonated with young people here and young women who we now know make up most of the victims.
All of the victims are same age with me, so I don't know, just feel so sad. I just want to pray for them.
The families gather at funeral homes around the city. Here, 2 friends await burial in the rooms next door. James Sim and his friend were both killed, along with James's girlfriend. His father breaks down when he thinks of his younger son. James was such a good brother to him. They were so close. How will he cope with the loss, he asks. Jung-soo has been friends with James since he was 8.
I
was such a shy kid. I only had one friend. But James helped me become more extroverted and make friends.
The pain reverberates out. Because of a sense these deaths were avoidable. After days of questioning, police have admitted they failed to notice how quickly the deadly crowd had grown. Jean Mackenzie, BBC News, Seoul.
Now, it was a tight race, but in the end, by a very narrow margin, Brazil's left-wing former leader, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has won the country's presidential election. It's a stunning political comeback for him 2 decades after he first came into office. By just 2 percentage points, he beat the far-right incumbent Jair Bolsonaro, who still has not conceded defeat. Under Mr. Bolsonaro's rule, Brazil suffered one of the world's deadliest outbreaks of COVID and deforestation in the Amazon. Our South America correspondent Katie Watson reports.
Celebration on the streets of Sao Paulo and a sense of relief. They predicted a tight race, and it was a nail-biter to the very end.
I feel free, relieved, not only for the Brazilian people, but for the whole planet, for the Amazon, for the democracy, for the human rights. So we are very happy.
It's a very divided country, though. There'll be lots of people unhappy.
Yes, because it was a very little difference, the small difference. So we have to be very patient, and we have to leave the anger and the hatred away.
What a comeback for Brazil's president-elect, a man who left power just 12 years ago with a sky-high approval rating, but who then subsequently fell from grace over corruption scandals. Here he is again, Lula 2.0.
It was the hardest campaign of my life. It wasn't man against man, party against party. It was a group of people who love freedom and democracy against authoritarianism.
The noise on the streets filled the silence from Bolsonaro's camp. The speculation was that he went to bed. While voting was largely peaceful, there was a lot of expectation and nerves on Sunday as people cast their ballot. In this unequal country, the divide was clear. Rich and poor, left and right. People had a stark choice to make.
I'm voted for Bolsonaro, of course.
What's the best thing about Bolsonaro? Why do you like Bolsonaro?
I don't agree with him like 100%. I think he has a lot of flaws, but he's a man of God. He has like the right principles, and he's not the biggest thief that ever exists in Brazil.
It's very sad, in my opinion, to see Brazil in this state where we have to decide between 2 candidates that just make Brazil such a polarized country, inciting violence, extremes, and I think especially they don't represent any of the young population, right? Any progress in the country. It's really very sad. So my vote is a vote of protest.
Amid such division, it was Lula who made it to the finish line first.
People here are shouting, Lula has returned. Like him or loathe him, this is a historic moment for Brazil. 20 years after Lula first became president, he's back in the top job.
But for these people, a Lula victory is not a victory for Brazil. His job will be to unite them and be their president too. Lula will have to contend with conservative lawmakers in whatever he wants to do. It won't be easy, but tonight these supporters aren't worried. He's back in the top job and he's back to change Brazil.
Let's go live to Katie now in Sao Paulo. Katie, we still haven't heard from the beaten candidate Jair Bolsonaro. I mean, will he concede defeat eventually, and what happens if he doesn't?
Well, I think, Ben, that is what everybody here in Brazil is wanting to know. Will he concede defeat? When will he concede defeat? We have heard nothing from him or from his sons, who are also prominent politicians. Jair Bolsonaro, throughout the campaign, he questioned the voting system. He alleged fraud with no evidence to do so. He's known as the tropical Trump, and he is a big admirer of Donald Trump, and many people feared that he might do something similar in contesting the results once they came through. It was such a close race. Maybe he'll ask for a recount. I think everybody here is just wanting, to find out exactly what the next step is. Certainly, Brazil woke up. Half the people were elated, the other half are no doubt seething, and that's going to be the biggest challenge for Lula in the next few months, and of course during his 4 years as president, bringing together these two sides and making sure that he comes across as that legitimate president for those people who did not want Lula back in power.
All right, Katie, thank you very much. Katie Watson there, our South America correspondent in Sao Paulo. Here, a coroner has criticised Exeter University for failing to provide adequate support to a student who took his own life last year, saying there was a catalogue of missed opportunities. Harry Armstrong Evans died at his family home after struggling with his mental health. Both he and his family had contacted the university to seek support. Well, our correspondent Jenny Kumar has been following events for us this lunchtime. Jenny.
Yes, Harry's family say he was kind, gentle and intelligent. He was on course to get a high grade for his degree, but in January last year he got a poor set of exam results. He contacted the university, telling them about his lockdown isolation, his declining mental health and his exam worries. His mother also contacted them, worried about his welfare. Now, the coroner said today that there was a catalogue of missed opportunities and that the university failed to respond effectively. And today, the family called for a series of legal changes, including the requirement of universities to publish annual suicide rates in what would be known as Harry's Law.
No parent should outlive their child. These simple and inexpensive measures would, we have no doubt, ensure that fewer parents are made to suffer the misery that we will live with forever.
Now, the coroner says that they will be writing to the Vice-Chancellor asking for a review of staff training and of suicide prevention policies and welfare services. Today, the universities say they will be considering the details of the coroner's findings and that they will make sure that lessons are learnt.
Jenny, thank you. Jenny Kumar reporting. The troubled UK battery start-up company Britishvolt is on the brink of potentially falling into administration with almost 300 jobs at risk. The company has been developing a £3.8 billion gigafactory in Blyth, Northumberland, which it had hoped would employ up to 3,000 workers. Well, our business correspondent Theo Leggett is with me now. Theo, what has gone wrong?
Well, Ben, you said the word yourself. This is a start-up company, a very ambitious start-up company with plans to build a factory that would produce 300,000 electric vehicle batteries every year, employ some 3,000 people and many more in the supply chain. But the problem is a venture like this doesn't make any money until it actually begins producing batteries. And it was clear that this project had problems. It was supposed to begin producing its first batteries at the end of next year. That was then deferred into 2024. And then quite recently, the company said it would not now be producing any batteries until 2025. Meanwhile, it was using up cash. The development of a project like this does cost money, and we know that it attempted to get some government funding brought forward, but the government appears to have said that is not going to happen because it was worried that this money, which was earmarked for investment, would be used for day-to-day purposes. So all in all, it appears that the company doesn't have enough cash to keep running for much longer, which, unless somebody steps in and starts producing new investment, it will not be able to continue running. It has no option but to put itself into administration.
OK, Theo, thank you very much indeed. Theo Leggett there, our business correspondent. And the time is just 20 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. Pressure is mounting on the Home Secretary over worsening conditions at a migrant processing centre in Kent. And coming up, the latest on rescue efforts in India after a suspension bridge collapsed, killing 141 people.
Coming up on the BBC News Channel, Marcus Rashford's red-hot form for Manchester United sees him in contention for England's World Cup plans. Rashford scored his 100th goal in their 1-0 win over West Ham, with United now a point off the top 4.
Russia has launched a fresh wave of missile attacks on Ukraine, including on the city of Kharkiv and the capital, Kyiv, where some areas are now without power or water. Russia has been stepping up its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure as winter approaches. Let's go live now to our correspondent in Kyiv, Hugo Beshega. Hugo, how much damage has been done?
Well, Ben, power cuts have been reported across the country, including in the major cities of Dnipro, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, and here in Kyiv, where the mayor says many parts of the city are still without water. And this has been Russia's strategy in recent weeks, to damage this country's critical infrastructure ahead of winter and, as a result, demoralize Ukrainians. Reacting to today's attacks, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said instead of fighting on the battlefield, Russia was fighting civilians. And today's attacks happened 2 days after Russia accused Ukraine of attacking its Black Sea fleet in occupied Crimea. And in response to that, Moscow abandoned the landmark grain deal that allowed Ukraine to resume its grain export, something that Kyiv dismissed as blackmail. But this morning, there were signs that this deal could survive. A dozen ships left Ukrainian ports, but from Moscow there was a warning. Dmitry Peskov, a spokesperson for the Kremlin, said those exports might be risky as Russia couldn't guarantee the safety of ships. Ben?
Hugo, thank you very much. Hugo Beshega there, our Ukraine correspondent in Kyiv. Police in India have made 9 arrests after a suspension bridge collapsed, killing 141 people. The pedestrian bridge in the western state of Gujarat had only just reopened after repair work. And reports say that some of the arrests are from the construction company that carried out the work. Well, people had been seen on the bridge rocking it and trying to make it sway just before it collapsed into the river below. Yogita Limai reports.
More than a dozen rafts and some swimmers there are scouring the Machu River. It's unlikely at this point that they will find any survivors. They've been doing this for hours. About an hour ago, a body was pulled out, but we know that people are still missing, and that's what they're looking for. Here to the right, that's where the suspension footbridge was. You can see the net there, and these cranes have been brought in and they've been working through the night. And I'm just going to show you through the crowds if I can. This is essentially, this was the bridge. This is the metal walkway, the metal base of the bridge, and the net that formed the sides of the suspension footbridge. It collapsed on Sunday evening, and this morning the terrifying footage of the moments of when it actually collapsed, CCTV footage, has emerged. Scores of people were plunged into the river, and the darkness compounded the difficulties of trying to find survivors. And in a hospital close by, where the injured have been taking the dead as well, since the morning they've been handing over the bodies of those who've died to their families. But there are, as I said, people still missing.
I was here on the bridge. We fell in the centre. I was able to escape, but I couldn't find my sister.
The footbridge was built back in the 19th century. It had been closed for repairs for months and had been reopened just a week ago. So there are lots of difficult questions for officials here to answer, especially whether safety checks were done before it was thrown open to public, whether there was overcrowding on the bridge, and what exactly caused it to collapse.
Yogita Limai reporting. Here, 2 men have died in a shooting in South London. Police were called to Brixton just before 8 o'clock last night, where the men were found with serious injuries. They were both pronounced dead at the scene. It is the second fatal gun attack in London in 5 days. The latest stage of the public inquiry into coronavirus has started today, and our health correspondent Nick Triggle's been listening to the proceedings. Nick, just tell us what's been discussed today.
Well, we're still at the preliminary hearing stage, Ben, and this is where the lawyers set out how the inquiry will work. The public hearings, where the Prime Minister and other officials give evidence, will not start till next year. Today we had the start of the preliminary hearings for Module 2, and this is looking at the political decision-making. We found out the identity of the core participants. These are the groups and individuals who will be given enhanced rights to see the documents and make submissions. And alongside the government departments, they include a host of organisations representing the most vulnerable in society, people with disabilities, children, women at risk of domestic violence. And one of the key aims, as Hugo Keith, the counsel for the inquiry, set out this morning, is to look at whether the risks these groups face were properly taken into account by the decision makers. But clearly a major focus is going to be, he said, on the momentous decisions to introduce lockdowns and restrictions on people's lives. There's going to be a particular emphasis on the January to March 2020 period and whether earlier action, an earlier lockdown could have saved lives. And we heard that thousands of pieces of evidence have been requested, including even WhatsApp messages shared between the Prime Minister and his team.
OK, Nick, thank you. Our health correspondent, Nick Triggle. Many customers with non-smart prepayment meters have not yet redeemed vouchers to help with energy bills. From the 1st of October, households should have begun to receive the first £400 instalment of the government's energy bill support scheme. But the Post Office, the UK's biggest voucher processor, said only 60% of those eligible had redeemed the credits so far, even though vouchers are valid for just 90 days. The government has urged consumers to use the credit as soon as possible. Now to the cricket, and Australia have beaten Ireland by 42 runs to boost their chances of reaching the men's T20 World Cup semi-finals. Australia's victory hurts England's chances of reaching the final four. Here's our sports correspondent, Nesta McGregor, who was watching.
A week on from a famous win against England, Ireland's cricketers knew facing Australia on Halloween was an equally scary prospect. The defending champions, though, made a nightmare start. In a tightly contested group, defeat for either team meant almost certain elimination. A go-hard or go-home approach was required. Mitch Marsh was clearly keen to avoid the latter. When he was eventually dismissed for 28, Australia then settled and found their groove. Captain Aaron Finch treating the crowd to several boundaries on his way to top scoring with 63. When it was all said and done, Ireland had been set a sizable target of 180 to win. Now, if Australia had been frightening with the bat, they were equally as devilish with the ball. Ireland had lost 5 wickets with less than 50 runs on the board. And they never recovered, although an unbeaten 71 from Lorcan Tucker made the margin of defeat a little more respectable. Orange sky at night, Aussie delight. Nesta McGregor, BBC News.
Now, a new world record has been set in Switzerland for the longest ever passenger train. Described by the rail chief in charge of the record attempt as Swiss perfection, the 100-coach train wound through the mountains with thousands of people turning up to watch it on its scenic journey. Rolling through the Swiss Alps, the world's longest ever passenger train. The 100-coach train is 1.2 miles long, and over the weekend it set a new world record. 7 drivers were needed to complete the attempt, all working in lockstep with one another. Families and train enthusiasts alike lined the route, which passed over viaducts and through mountain tunnels on a 15.5-mile journey to mark 175 years of Swiss railways. The Guinness World Records validated the results for the longest passenger train ever to complete a journey. The train even generated energy that's being used in people's homes.
We had also to export, in a way, this energy to the public electricity network. so that, yes, I don't know, somebody maybe was able to cook something while watching this wonderful train.
And for the lucky 150 passengers on board, there were spectacular views on a route that spiralled through a part of the Alps listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Lovely weather there in the Alps. Let's see what the weather's doing here at home. Helen Willits is here, and the end of a very warm October.
Indeed, it has been, Ben, not just here in the UK either, but as we saw across parts of France and Spain as well, we've seen some record temperatures. Just want to show you what the average is at this time of year. They'll start to dip away, our temperatures in October, but actually, as Ben alluded to there, it has been a very warm October for some of us. The final figure still being counted, but it's not alone. The orange there shows how much above average, but it's all year. Every single month this year, we've seen temperatures in central England above where they should be, above the long-term average. For the last week or so, it's mostly been because of the wind direction, dragging that warm weather up from Iberia, from France. And with it today, it's dragging up a lot of cloud and rain as well. And indeed, temperatures will just dip back a little bit through the coming week as we turn to the Atlantic for our weather influence. But for the rest of the day, it's a wet one, courtesy of this weather front sitting across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. Increasing showers across southern areas, perhaps some of the driest weather in between. Across perhaps east of the Grampians, down towards the borders, and 16 degrees, well above the average that we'd see here at this time of year, 12 or 13. About 16 in Northern Ireland as well, the average about 13 here too, and further south. Although those showers could be heavy and could be increasingly thundery as they move their way up across the channel. Increasing winds as well for Devon and Cornwall, gale force winds here. And those gale force winds drift through the channel to other English channel coasts as we go through the night, affecting the Channel Islands, northern France as well. Gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour, disruptive gusts of wind. And as a result, temperatures won't drop much below 9 to 12 degrees Celsius, which is actually about the daytime average for this time of year. So a wet and windy start for some tomorrow, but that gets pushed out into the North Sea. The rain lingers rather more across the northeast of Scotland, the Northern Isles compared with today, and the Channel Islands along with southern areas see an influx of greater showers through the afternoon, heavier showers tomorrow. Temperatures just a notch down because the wind's coming from the west. And that Atlantic influence continues into Wednesday. Brief respite, a little ridge of high pressure Tuesday night, but look at this making its way in for Wednesday. Gales more widely once again, heavy rain once again for many parts because it has actually been very wet for Northern Ireland so far this month. 150% of their average rainfall has fallen, and it's really wet out there at the moment, and there's more of that wet weather to come as well as we go through the week. It looks on balance as if Friday might be a little bit drier, but we've got more rain to come over the weekend. As I say, do be careful in Northern Ireland as well this afternoon, Ben. Very wet here.
OK, Helen, thank you very much. And a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. Pressure is mounting on the Home Secretary over worsening conditions at a migrant processing centre in Kent. She's expected to make a statement in the Commons this afternoon. And that's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me, and on BBC One now, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.